And I'm going to assume we are live.
You might want to record. I don't know if you have.
Very good point. Lovely. All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's been a while since Narayani and I have been live this entire week. If you have been following some of what's happening here in Ananda Mumbai, we've found a house that's going to be an ashram of sorts for the foreseeable future, whatever that may bring. And since we've been spending all this time with the carpenters and the painters
and we don't have internet
and we don't have internet there yet, but also with a lot of our devotees who've been coming every day offering seva. And as we're building this place, even though we're calling it an ashram, what it really is the beginnings of what community living could be, perhaps a version of community living in India, in Mumbai especially. And so as we were building this, and we were going to have this special satsang with Nayaswamis Jyotish and Devi, who I will introduce shortly, we felt like this would be the ideal topic, not just for us to draw on the experience that they have gained over these 50 years, but also for all of us to see the potential of community living, not just from a spiritual perspective, but also from a practical reality. What is it, and why, as the title suggests, could it be the way of the future? And joining us to share on that, to share with us, we have Nayaswamis Jyotish and Devi. They really need no introduction. We've all been fortunate enough to have had them several times with us. But it helps always to remember, especially now from the perspective of this topic, we're talking about these two souls, great souls, who not only, in a sense, started the community movement with Swami Kriyananda, having started Ananda, having successfully not just run but grow these communities of Ananda over the last 50 years, but of course being and building it in complete attunement with the vision that Paramhans Yogananda put into, through Swami Kriyananda, put into the ether when he said that community living will become the way of the future. And as part of the work that they have done, they are the recipients of the Global Ambassador for Peace, which the United Nations has conferred upon them because of this work, not just spiritual, which of course, which is what we are here for, but also practical, a way to live that truly addresses and tackles the issues that the world is experiencing right now, not just in mind, not just in mental policy, but in actual daily living. So thank you so much, Jyotish and Devi ji, for joining us. It's night time for you, yes, but it's not too late, so we're not feeling that guilty yet.
No, you don't need to be guilty at all. It's only a little after 8:30 here, so we're happy to be with you.
Would you please lead us in a prayer, and however, we'd like to just ask you to inaugurate this session.
Okay, just tune in mentally. It's hard to do reciprocal prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Beloved masters, guide us and bless us as we seek to attune our consciousness with thee, attune our lives with the ideal that you brought, open our hearts to other people to help them however they are in need, to share the friendships of spiritual family. Guide us and bless us. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Maybe we'll meditate just a minute or two just to get centered and leave behind whatever preoccupations we might be carrying. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Thank you.
Thank you. For those of you who've just joined us, we are with Nayaswamis Jyotish and Devi, and we're going to talk about, have a conversation, and draw from them around the subject of community living, the way of the future. Let's start with perhaps the obvious question. What do you think it was that Paramahansa Yogananda, our guru, why did he say that community living would be the way of the future? What do you think he was envisioning that would almost guide the world naturally in that direction?
That's a very interesting question, Shurjo. You know, Master said that the idea of communities is the right lifestyle for Dwapara Yuga, and that the idea would spread like wildfire. Well, we haven't seen that yet, but we're only 300 years into Dwapara Yuga, so it's very early times yet. But we're beginning to see, I don't know, the foreshadow of this movement. So there are a few influences that come together. First of all, Master was always focused on those things that would help raise our consciousness and turn our lives more toward seeking God, toward cooperation, toward harmony, toward living in attunement with the laws of God, with the laws sound a little heavy, but with the natural ways of living that would help make us happy. And so his primary mission was spiritual, but as Swami put it one time, that if you're seeking God spiritually, if you have a particular spiritual path, which most of us do, then why not live together if you can? Because we mutually support each other on that quest. It's not easy to do it alone. And so the idea of a spiritual community, or world brotherhood community, as Master called it, is just a natural outgrowth of the desire of spiritual seekers to be together. So they want to be together more and more. And then in terms of the social pattern, we're already seeing the beginnings of technology allowing us to move away from having to be stuck in crowded cities, in crowded conditions, and noisy, heavy pollution, and so on. As that technology allows us to move away, then why not move into community with like-minded people?
And Swami wrote a little book called The Road Ahead some years ago. And he talked about the currents in society during Master's life, and we've certainly seen it evolve more in that direction. Things like the movement towards complexity and everyone's lives being so complicated, and technology has its pluses, but it also has that complexity that it draws us to. And then the movement towards simplicity, because as Sri Yukteswar said, God is simple, everything else is complex. So to grow spiritually, you need to find that sense of simplicity within yourself. And so communities in a more, whether it's in an urban or a rural environment, where things are integrated and more simple. Another trend that Master spoke about was the loss of a sense of the value of the individual. Like you see people, we were in Gorgon last year, and we saw it was the end of the workday, and there's a thing called Computer City or something like that. It's these big high-rise Cyber City, yeah. And it was the end of the workday, and literally thousands of young techies were pouring out of those buildings, and they all were dressed alike. They all look kind of alike, and the loss of the value of the individual. And that's why when people come to a place like Ananda Village, they're surprised because everyone is different. Everyone is themselves. It isn't like we all have the same mindset and we all look alike. great variety of interest and life patterns. But, and then finally, so those were trends. And then finally, communities, the trends towards atheism, towards loss of belief in a greater power, in God's presence in our life. And when you're, as you were saying, moving to your new ashram in a more, you're surrounded by nature. When you're around nature, you just automatically can feel God's presence. The other day, Jyotish and I were going for a walk, and Ananda Village has a lot of rural areas, and it's fall here now, and the leaves are golden and orange, and they're falling off the trees. It's just beautiful. But we looked down, and there was a large leaf. It was about that big, and it was the colors on it, the golden and light brown and orange tinge. It was like a masterpiece.
Intricate veins in it. You could study that one leaf for a whole day.
And you can't help but feel there's a greater creator. So all these, looking at that simple leaf. So all of these things, moving from complexity to simplicity, from the loss of the value of the individual to restating the worth of the individual, and then being able to be in a place of peace where you can feel God's presence.
What was the main reason that attracted you personally to a community living? And also, once you joined the community, was that what you expected, what you had in your mind? I mean, what you had in mind versus what was really an actual spiritual community living. What was that process? What attracted you? What you experienced? What was the reason behind it? And a little bit the process you went through until you really understood what was all about.
Yeah, interesting. First of all, I would never, ever have predicted that I would live in a community, growing up. It just would not have entered my mind. I don't know that I joined the community so much as I joined Swami Kriyananda. And I was working as his assistant. And so for me at the beginning, it was just one more project. It was like a book, or like of course, bigger and more inclusive. But I didn't so much consciously get in tune with a vision or idea of community as I was, just entrained with Swami and going to do whatever he was doing. And so, because it was right at that time that the very, very first, when I first visited Ananda village, there wasn't a village. It was an Ananda meditation retreat. There was no structure at all. We slept out on the ground in a tent or just under the stars. And it was a year or so before any building. So there wasn't really a community. It started as a retreat center where we could get away from the city and give retreats. But quickly people started arriving and living there, and some of them had families. And Swami always had in his mind the idea of communities. So it just naturally evolved rather than it was a real conscious decision and I had a big plan in my mind.
Yeah, when you asked the question, Narayani, I was sort of laughing inside because I thought you're giving us a lot more credit for consciously living our lives. I think those of us who came in the beginning, Master just drew us in. We had no idea what we were doing. I was living in the Midwest of America. Somebody gave me a little brochure. It was it was the first brochure about Ananda meditation retreat. And I looked, and had read autobiography, and I was interested in meditation, but hadn't really done much. And I looked at the address of Ananda, and the address changed. The postal service changed it, but at that time, the address was 900 Allegheny Star Route. And I saw that and I thought, wow, that's like going to another planet. I'm going to go there. I didn't know what it was. But so Master just blindfolded us and he got us here. And then he just said, okay, my children, work hard. Something good is going to happen here. And that's what we did. And yeah, we were surprised and delighted and disappointed and frustrated and ready to leave and wouldn't leave for a day, a moment, and all of the different aspects. But at the same time, in our hearts, we knew this was something really important. We didn't really know what it was, but we knew it was of great value. Maybe important isn't the right word, but of great value to humanity. And
in 10 or 15 years, as probably community living will develop in Mumbai, if you look back at these days, right now, this week, and somebody asks you, what was your plan at that time?
yeah.
You probably, I mean, you might make up something to make it sound like you really knew what you were doing. But the reality is your plan at this time is to get the place painted.
Yes.
And then the next step, and that's very much what community is like. You take it a day at a time, a week at a time,
A
a month
problem
at
at
a
a
time,
time.
a problem at a time. You solve that problem, and then 50 years later, you've got this glorious thing that people think you planned, but didn't really.
We often say to each other the line from Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, what do we do now, Indy? I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along. And that's really the truth.
But having said that, it's always trying to tune in to a directional purpose.
Yeah.
And so it isn't just random.
No.
That would be a mistake to leave.
Yeah.
We're always, just as you will, what activities you have there, what structures maybe you build or acquire, will always be directional to try to live more in tune with what Master and the great masters have in mind.
And Swami came in with this mission. You had the blessing of being very close to Swami in the last years of his life. And we had the blessing of being close with him earlier on and, throughout our lives. But he was born for this mission.
Mhm.
And through our love and dedication to him, we just followed in his wake and are still following in his wake.
Mm.
I'm sure you feel like the new ashram in Mumbai, he's there guiding you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking about, I mean, of course, we use the term ashram more to give a feeling, because sometimes community, in many
Doesn't
people's mind,
translate,
has different kind of connotations. But now in your 50 odd years, when you first started, it was different. You only knew Ananda, so to speak. But since then, you've visited so many places, you've connected with so many other spiritual organizations and heads and saints and swamis of all traditions. How is ashram different from community? What was it that Master was tuning into that kind of took the ashram concept but kind of grew it into this community lifestyle? What would you say is different?
It's a good question.
Yeah, very
Shurjo.
good question.
And they were 50 odd years, I'll tell you.
Yeah. To a certain extent, the dividing line between ashram and community is whether there are families.
Mm-hmm.
Because typically an ashram is quieter, more focused, more, and that's the way the meditation retreat started. It was more like an ashram, although on a bigger piece of property, but it was to teach and have people come. But as soon as families started coming, we realized that having a quiet, contemplative environment and having families and children didn't really work, because you didn't want to suppress the children. It's their natural, it's the stage in life to be buoyant and happy and explore. And you don't want to keep saying, shh, shh, don't talk, shh, And so the dividing line between ashram and community to a certain extent is children and families. And so the two are compatible. Community, you don't want also then to go too far and to say, well, then community just becomes about having families and doing business and so on, because both the purpose is to is to live a life in harmony and a deep, sincere spiritual search. But the lifestyle needs of the two, I would say, are different.
Yeah, I would add a different point, another point, that typically ashrams, the residents there can become passive and dependent on, well, someone is the benefactor of the ashram and they supply our needs and all I do is meditate. Where community is much more taking control and for everyone in it, not just the leaders, but Swami really empowered every area of activity for that, the people who are developing the garden, that they made the decisions, the people who are developing businesses, they made that decisions. So it's really developing initiative and willpower and active rather than passive. And what we see in, it's so much a part of Master's path, the use of willpower and energy and the law of success and magnetism. And those are a little harder to kind of tease out in an ashram because you don't need to. But when you're saying, all right, we have a big rent payment or a big land payment or a mortgage or whatever it is, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make it work? I remember most of you know that Ananda had a big forest fire, was hit. This was many years ago, 1976. But Swami came back. He was in Hawaii at the time writing The New Path. And he came back as soon as he heard. And as soon as the dust kind of settled, he had a big community meeting. It was, and someone gave us recently the tape of it, the recording of it. And it was amazing because there was no tragedy or self-pity or, oh, this is so terrible. He just said, all right, how are we going to rebuild the community? How are we going to live this winter? Somebody said, oh, I know how to, I've been reading a book about teepees. I can sew actually literally sew the teepee skin, said on and on and on. But it was such a marvelous demonstration of initiative, willpower, determination. And those are what you need to find God in this age. Maybe, and maybe I'm going to step on people's toes on this one, but in a more sattvic age, I think the model of an ashram is better. But in Dwapar Yuga, I think the model of community is better.
Because there's a shared responsibility in community, and generally speaking, in this age, we need to take responsibility and initiative.
In fact, about this subject of you guys living for 50 years within a community and not just only living, but, leading it and making sure that everyone feels the inspiration that not only has sustained you, but increased that inspiration of this way of life. Could you share with us perhaps 3 main spiritual benefits that you have received in through community living, through living in an environment, that environment 24/7 hours? And it's not always easy as we think, but if you can just share a little bit, what are the main spiritual benefits that one can gain by living in that environment?
But you do one and I'll do one.
Okay. Well, I would say one that keeps you focused on your purpose, because it's easy in life to get pulled off, distracted, and and you start out with your priority being, oh, I really want to dedicate myself to my spiritual life. And pretty soon things are constantly pulling on you. And so having a community where others are focused on the same thing, it keeps you much more aligned with that priority.
And then we'll alternate back and forth. Also, it's just such a natural part of human nature to think that the way we see the world is the one and only right way. I mean, and the world it's a sickness now in the world.
Yeah.
Everyone's way is right, and everyone, if you don't think the way I do, you're wrong. But living in community, for me, one of the great benefits is just to realize there are many different perspectives. There are many different ways to see reality. And my way is one, but it's not the only one. And maybe it's not even the best one. But to be able to detach yourself from your own, not values, but your own sense of just what am I trying to say? Just
The rigidity, I guess, that's set in.
yes, the rigidity breaks down and you begin to realize, there are so many different ways to look at things.
Mm.
There's so many different perspectives. And the beauty of community that I've learned is that you gather a bunch of different perspectives, and from that emerges something that no one thought of. I've seen this happen so often. It's like a miracle. It happened yesterday. We were having a conversation with a Zoom call with 5 people, and we were trying to come up with a solution that none of us could see. And then the more one person said, no, this and that and that. And then finally it became very clear there was something that incorporated everybody's ideas. And it was beautiful.
Kind of a positive variation of that is that community allows you to have friendships and connections that are close enough so that you let down the walls.
Yeah.
And you open your heart and your mind. And so I would say that, and I mean this literally and sincerely, there is not a single person in the community who hasn't inspired me in some way or another. And so everybody has some area that they almost like they specialize on behalf of everybody else. One person will have a wonderful sense of humor, and another will be artistic, and another will be very creatively ingenuous, have a lot of ingenuity, and but also spiritual elements. So you get lots of models, which you do in the world too, but by and large, when we don't know people, we maintain a barrier. We don't let them influence us too much or let them in. But in community, that barrier comes down.
And another thing too, because you keep your doors open. Master talked about the negative tendency in people to have us 4 and no more, your own little family, and then anyone outside of that, that's their problem. But when you begin breaking down us 4 and no more, and you realize, as Jyotish was saying, I care about every single person that lives here. Some of them are not close friends of mine. I don't interact with them much. Of course, now we don't interact with anybody with COVID, but nevertheless, to just realize that everyone is my friend, and that in that expanded sense of identity, the little ego begins to just not be that important. You realize that who I am is this wonderful collective of souls seeking God and as disciples of Master. And the beautiful thing is, because your doors are open, new people come. And sometimes they're in tune and they fit in so beautifully. And sometimes they have potential, but there's a lot of rough edges. And it's one of the things I actually love is somebody comes, because I think I was like that. I had potential, but there was a lot of rough edges. And Swami just kept polishing and polishing and polishing. And just to watch that process of people getting more in tune and not, by rules and criticism and chastisement, but just the power of the magnetism and the consciousness of the group. It's a beautiful thing to behold.
And then just briefly, a third thing is that, one of the problems of life is that you tend to get in a rut.
Mhm.
And you go to the same job, you see the same people, you just over and over, and pretty soon life starts to get boring and you're not creative anymore. It just doesn't, well, community gives you endless possibilities for positive energy and new experiences and new things to do. And so it keeps you moving and active and young. Maybe too much so to a certain extent.
And my last point. Okay, I'm going to squeeze two in for the price of one. First of all, the potential for really, really fulfilling human relationships, for marriage that is fulfilling beyond what you thought it could be, friendships that grow deeper and deeper over the years. Because why is that? And parent-child relationships that are very close and dear, because you're surrounded with an aura of God's presence. And in God's presence, love is so strong. And so that's one, the deep, fulfilling relationships and friendships. But then the other one is, in all self-honesty, I do not think I would have continued on the spiritual path if I had not been in a community. I would have thought about it. I would have wished I had, but I don't think I would be meditating twice a day, every day for all these years if I wasn't living in this context. So it totally gives you that impetus. And you wake up, you know that everybody else in the community, even if you never see them, they're all meditating. And, so that's what you do. So that's a great question, Narayani. We could obviously go on a really long time, but maybe that's enough.
Just kind of segueing a little bit. Does community have to be spiritual? From the perspective of, there might be a lot of people out there interested in the community lifestyle, but not necessarily having a spiritual perspective or even a spiritual direction to it. What principles that now that you have made up as you have gone along, that could be kind of universal, irrespective of whether people have an inclination towards God or not? What do you think? What works and binds a community together that could perhaps be universalized to a group who has nothing to do with a spiritual lifestyle, but have a deep yearning to live the way that we do?
Well, I would say that you have to have a community based around some higher aspiration than just, I want things for myself.
Right.
I want an easy life. Because when you think about what you want for yourself, ego begins to get stronger. And as ego gets stronger, ego is separation. And so as the egos get stronger, it's hard to hold a community together because you're always having people that are clashing. And so you need something that the aspiration, group aspiration, is like the oil that allows the mechanism to work. Now, idealistically, it could be around the environment, it could be around education, there could be many ideals to which the individuals in the group are willing to a certain extent to sublimate their own self-interest. But without that, I don't think it's possible. because I don't see that it would hold together. Having said that, anything else also is less ego dissolving than the spiritual path. The purpose of it is to dissolve the ego. And therefore, in that dissolving of the ego, the community works better. So to a certain extent, I would say, if you redefine the terms, no, you can't have a community that isn't spiritual if you define dissolving as the ego as spiritual, not believing in this God or following that religion or whatever. So I think it has to have that aspiration toward which the group can agree.
Yeah, so Swamiji had said that in the future he could see Ananda community. He said the village is sort of like the stem cell. It's generic. It has education and art and agriculture. But he said he could see communities specializing, like there would be one community all on education and on and on. But he said, he did say that if there was not a spiritual component, and Jyotish defined that nicely, is just stepping back from your own ego, that it would be very hard to maintain it, because he always gave the example, you heard him say that, and this was literally true. There was some community trying to emerge, and one evening they were trying to decide what to have for dessert, chocolate pudding or vanilla pudding, and they got into a big argument, and the community dissolved, over that. I always had a hard time believing that, but anyway.
Master said it. So.
Anyway, if it's true, there it is. If it's not, it's certainly symbolic. You could see. I mean, right now that's what the world's doing. It's not vanilla pudding or chocolate pudding, but it's it's a different level doing.
I went one time to a conference with Swami on communities, and there was this one presentation by a very impressive fellow, and he was talking about the community that they were just ready to launch, and they had this expert for solar energy and this expert for biodynamics, and they were just looking for an expert in how to grow algae in their ponds. And when they had all of that just in place, and they'd be ready to launch and when we left that evening, Swami said, that community is never going to happen, because they were thinking of it from outside in, and what holds community together are people. And so they were thinking about what people do, not what people are, and how people grow and how they're nurtured and how they are fulfilled. And as Swami put it, people are more important than things.
And he certainly lived that. He said once that in building Ananda, for all these years, he said for him, it was a mostly compromise of what he would like to have seen happen and what people were ready to do.
Wow.
And so he was, yes, but he said it was more important to strengthen and affirm the value of the individual. And that's what he did. And that's why we have this global work, because we have hundreds and ever increasing numbers of people that realize, I have something to add here. I can contribute. I can build this work. And because he implanted in the people that he could, and we're implanting it to the next group, that it's just based on individuals and their own potential, achieving their highest potential.
I was thinking, like any other family, whether live in a spiritual community or in the city, sometimes there are misunderstandings among the family members. Sometimes there is conflict or disharmonious relationships. We know karma from past lives is involved and all those things. But once you are committed to change, to improve yourself, how do we deal in spiritual communities with conflict, with people's egos clashing? And how do we come to an uplifted solution? How do we deal with conflict?
Well, first of all, there's a difference of opinion, which is absolutely needed. But difference of opinion does not have to be in conflict. Conflict is generally comes up when one or more parties are inflexible. And so, community seems like a little bit amorphous, but you talk about a marriage or a family, and of course there are differences of opinion. And a healthy family needs to have differences of viewpoints and discussions and so on. But it gets dysfunctional when one person holds and says, I demand that it be this way. And that's when conflict comes in, or when more than one. And so one of the things that has worked, and it's worked marvelously well at Ananda, I think partly because we have high-minded souls here, but nonetheless, the principle when people get together of not this is what I want, but what is trying to happen. And when it shifts from what I want to what is trying to happen here, then differences of opinion are wonderful. As Devi was saying in our conversation with 5 people, everybody had a different opinion, but they were all directed toward trying to solve something. And we bounced around until everybody agreed, oh yeah, that's the best idea. And it was really an amalgamation of several ideas. So yes, difference of opinion has to be there, and you don't want to suppress it, but it does not have to build into conflict unless people get too pushy or too inflexible.
And yes, there are, of course, human nature is such that people do get into arguments. A few days ago, a couple who are friends of ours, they must have had an argument. So we were giving a satsang, and then afterwards the wife came up to us and she said, how do you all deal when you have a problem in your marriage, an argument? And we said something. And then the husband came up to us separately and he said, there's a joke that God decided he was going to find 4 harmonious, obedient wives and send them to the 4 corners of the earth. But then he changed his mind and made the earth round.
And laughed.
Anyway, so
we assumed that as one of our friends, 2 of them were starting a very small, but they were starting an ashram. And a few years later, one of them said, yes, that's when I first realized there are 2 God's wills.
But, seriously too, another thing you learn, there's a quote in the Gita that I'm trying to live more and more. The wise man sees action in inaction and inaction in action. If there's somebody in the community that's always causing problems and is disharmonious, more and more I realize, send light to that person and let Divine Mother direct the course of events. If you try to get in there and change that person, it only exacerbates things. It makes it worse. But if you consciously surround that person with light and then just say, Divine Mother, if this person is supposed to stay, let him stay. If they're supposed to leave, let him leave. I'm just going to tell very briefly the story about Dr. George.
Okay.
This is an amazing story. This is Dr. George, true story, was a direct disciple of Master. He was when Master was in America. He was an eccentric. He wasn't really
extreme eccentric.
And but Master said he was one of his highest, most advanced spiritual disciples. He lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is in the Midwest, and it was during the Depression, and he just would. He had a little house in the city, but he would go and he would scrounge material and wood and windows. And he built this ramshackle house without any permits. And just to
with many more bedrooms. Every time he'd just create another room, another room.
Because it was during the Depression and people didn't have places to live.
Mm.
But one time this family moved in and he was just open to everybody. But this family was very disharmonious, always angry, always causing trouble. And finally they said, we're going to report you to the county health officials because, you know, this is not the code and they're going to condemn it and you're going to have to leave. And one of the disciples said to Dr. George, what are we going to do? And he said, don't worry, Divine Mother will take care of it. And in the middle of the night, that the man said, we're going tomorrow and reporting you. The middle of the night, the family left and they went in the room in the morning and the room was filled with cockroaches, just that one room, totally filled with cockroaches. And so they called in the exterminator to get rid of it. And the man said, this is very strange. These are not even American cockroaches. These are Indian cockroaches.
Said, I've been in this business for my whole life. I've never seen them. I've read about them.
Wow.
So, yeah, just amazing. But the point being, let Divine Mother work with the people. You don't have to drive out the rotten apples. You know, Divine Mother calls the right children to come. And if somebody's meant to be there, even if they're, you know, kind of hard to get along with, and there's been people like that, it's like you'd rather not interact with them, but you know they're master's children, so you just let it go.
By and large, for all of us, our job is to give love and kindness.
Mm.
And the problems, if we try to solve problems by enforcing our will, it generally creates more problems. If we try to solve problems by giving appropriate love and kindness, I don't mean, you know, if somebody's drinking, you say, oh, wonderful, wonderful. The more alcohol you have, the better. Oh, wonderful. No, of course not. But appropriate loving kindness, and then people will grow out of the problems come from a state of consciousness. And if you raise the consciousness, the problems either disappear or a different set come in. And if it gets too bad, then
The
Divine Mother will
cockroaches.
send the cockroaches.
For people who obviously can't take, you know, a big step, such as, okay, I'm going to move into a community, or even I'm going to start something, what are some principles that we could start already living by that promote community, perhaps even magnetize community living? And I'm even talking from the practical perspective, like Master spoke of, you know, buying land, growing food, or having a place where job and school. And I mean, so there are certain things that Master kind of envisioned or saw as how community should be expressed. You've been to Mumbai, you've seen what the city is like. And most of our centers in India have a similar reality to them.
And people's lives.
And then people's lives are just people's lives. What would you say could be a starting point, or even just individually, how do they start to shift their own awareness towards a community direction?
You know, we're already seeing it at play in several places, including Mumbai. And so there's a progression. Community is not buildings and land and places. It's the interaction of people.
Mm.
And so it starts with people coming together spiritually with a meditation group or a center. And, you know, you've had a center, wonderful center in Mumbai. And what happens over a period of time is that those who are interested come more and more and more, and they begin to form more permanent connections, and they form a little community. And then out of that will be a core group of people who it's not enough to have a center. Gosh, I want to meditate with you guys every day. I want to share projects. I want to serve together. I want to do seva. And can't we get a ashram? where we can come every day and we can be together and serve. And that's the next stage is you go from, meditation group to center to ashram, where it's living and doing all of the spiritual things together. And then the next step is there are too many people interested. We've got to get a bigger space. But if you start with the bigger space and think that you can build community because you've got a nice building, it doesn't work that way. It's like a child growing. And so you guys are on the third of 4 steps. You're just starting that ashram, and that will magnetize the people who really want to be in community. Probably what will happen is that they will live in the immediate area and start moving in around there, or they'll be willing to travel, to commute for half hour or something each way every day. But people will start coming together, and then it'll be too much trouble to commute, so they'll move together, and pretty soon it'll evolve into you guys saying, we'd better start looking for some place where 40 or 50 of us can live, because that's how many want to be together.
That was a very thorough answer. The only thing I would add to that, I mean, there's service, seva together, meditation together, common goals and projects, but also there, you should look for ways that people can begin. Just some community changes the way you look at life. It really does. I mean, and you don't realize it, but step by step, you see the world very differently and in a very wonderful way. I mean, it's not like you're brainwashed, but you just once you're part of a community, the whole world is your community. You start with a microcosm, and then you realize really there's no limit. Everybody's my friend. Everybody's my brother and sister. And that's, we didn't say that when you said, what did Master see? But World Brotherhood, Jyotish just wrote his blog this week on World Brotherhood. Master called them World Brotherhood communities. That was his colonies, he called them. That was his vision, world brotherhood. So that transformation from us, first ego, then maybe us 4 no more, then maybe my, extended family, to world brotherhood, that's the progression. And so people need to really try, maybe to begin trying to embrace greater realities, to see that it isn't just what political party do I belong to, or what religious sect do I belong to, what culture, nation, any of that. But to really begin, it moves you towards becoming a world citizen. And it's such a joyful thing. I mean, Swami was a world citizen. He could go anywhere, speak anybody's language with very little effort. And it was beautiful to behold. So anyway.
What do you think is Ananda's role representing Yogananda's teachings? What do you think Ananda, all of us, in the name of Yogananda's mission, we can have to contribute right now to the world?
The world desperately needs a model of a way of life that actually works and produces real fulfillment. Right now, by and large, the focus of most people is on job, money, possessions, and
pleasure.
And as long as you haven't achieved the end of that, it seems like as long as you're chasing it, you can believe that a better job, more money, a bigger house, more pleasure, more possessions is going to make you happy. But gradually you find out that that model does not work. And there you come right back. People are more important than things. the way you feel is more important than the things you have. And so um, Ananda provides a model of a way of life that is more fulfilling and ends in greater happiness. And now we've got more than a 50-year track record to say that this actually works, you know. And at the beginning, it sounds like theory, but now we're beyond the theoretical stage. So Ananda provides a model for the world. And as we were talking earlier, you certainly don't have to have the same gurus or the same beliefs or the same models or anything. It's just kind of the model of working together for a higher purpose in a cooperative, willing, supportive way.
Mhm.
What it brings to the world now, it's, Swamiji said that Master was the avatar for Dwapara Yuga. He felt that really to break down, Kali Yuga is defined, the age of form, by separation, by walls. Dwapara Yuga is defined by energy and expansion. And so I think really Master's role in he's ushering in Dwapara Yuga consciousness through communities. And no, the form isn't important. I mean, right now, because of the pandemic, we're virtually not interacting with anyone physically. We're doing a lot of Zoom calls and conferences, but you don't feel separated because community isn't about us all. We have a beautiful new temple that we can't use because it's against the law now to have religious gatherings of more than a few people. So, but it doesn't matter because it's really working with the energy of Dwapara Yuga, practicing Kriya Yoga, because, and that again, we haven't mentioned that yet, but everyone practicing Kriya Yoga in a community, it's like you're all working with that same conscious raising of subtle energy.
And community is really being sharing together positively and hopefully spiritually. It isn't necessary to live together. It's just that it naturally evolves into wanting it to be that way.
And some people can't.
Yeah, and some people can't. All of our city centers have a big group around that don't live in the community, but participate. And in some cases, they participate more than those living in the community.
So they want it more.
Yeah. So it isn't necessarily necessary to live together. So many models work.
Lovely. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much. This really, for us especially, as we're starting our first steps. It's interesting, Jyotish, that you mentioned about not getting a big place and hoping that community happens. Because in the beginning, we were naturally saying, okay, we need a at least a 6-bedroom house, and we've been putting that energy out quite consciously and powerfully. And nothing was, we weren't receiving that feedback from the universe. And the moment we said, okay, let's start smaller, and we said, let's start with a 3-bedroom, and it was the moment that shift happened, pretty much within a week, this place just popped into our kind of in our lives. So you can see Divine Mother Master kind of not wanting us to go far beyond what perhaps the energy really needs right now is a smaller space where there's more dynamic involvement than a larger space that does not have as much energy behind it.
Yeah, and also we've seen a few models in Ananda where if you get a big space, then the energy shifts from supporting people to having to drive them in order to pay for the big space. And that it just doesn't work.
And one final thought, and I know we should be wrapping up here, but we've kind of implied it in a lot of what we've said, but and humorously as well. But one of the beautiful things, and what made it keyed off in my mind was when you said we had thought of a big place, but then what came was a little place, is Swami used the word cooperation with grace. And that's such an important part of community. You think, oh, we're going to do this, but to step back and say, God, what do you want us to do? Well, we think this would be the best way, but you show us. And sometimes he has to hit us over the head with a hammer to get us to see what really is the best thing to do. But and again, that's part of the transformation and living in communities is you learn to sublimate your will to the divine will. And when you do that, but not passively, dynamically, with everything you've got, but tuning into what God wants first. And then something happens. Ananda Village is a testimony to cooperating with grace.
We also wanted to mention we've just recently received your book. We had and I mean, of course, the title itself is beautiful, A Touch of Love. But what we're seeing really is all those experiences that you've been talking about on how really just to live and what are the practical ways that we can manifest, whether it's love, whether it's joy, whether it's light. And your series continues to grow. So thank you so much for this. And I want to mention to anybody who's watching who perhaps doesn't yet have this book, it's an absolute gem. And if you would like to have the book, we will put the information up on the post, a link where you can get, or a phone number perhaps from where you can order directly. But we just wanted to thank you both for this collection. Because what's really lovely is you can open it up and say, oh, I could do this today. It's no more that, oh, how lovely, these philosophies are just fabulous. This is more, I could actually just do this right now. So it's so helpful. It really is.
Well, we'll keep you busy for a long time then.
Good. We need to be busy.
By the way, Jyotish, you were working on a book about the 5 S's.
No, Ananda Seva.
Ananda Seva. How
yes.
is it going?
Well,
man proposes.
Yeah, man proposes. So I had in mind that I was going to take time, maybe a few months, to write that book. And then about 7 projects came up one after another. Wow. And so I still have in mind that I'm going to take a couple of months and write that book. And I'm waiting for those projects to at least get less urgent. The latest one was, coronavirus. So
quite the project.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. We do look forward to that book as well. We right. as a manual on how really to get people involved in creating community together. So whenever God decides, whenever Divine Mother decides, that's what's trying to happen. But thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. Yes. Thank you for giving us a little bit more also clarity. Narayani and I, our experience of community in our heart seems like, oh, we've been doing this all our, lifetimes. But sometimes it's just helpful to redirect certain aspects of, okay, now we're starting something new and we want to start it right, and we want to start it at the way Swami would have wanted it to be. So thank you for bringing that.
Thank you.
Our joy.
It's so lovely to be with you all. And for everyone who is watching tonight, this morning, just our love and our blessings that you all can grow ever more deeply in awareness of God's presence, because that's the meaning of life. Without it, it's just an empty shell. But as Master said, with God, life is, without God, life is.
With God, everything is beautiful. Yeah. Without God, everything is everything but beautiful.
That's right. And so keep seeking, and you will find. God bless you all.
Thank you. God bless you.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Okay, let me